Every single time we generate an impression online, we generate a piece of data. At the user level, every single click, ad engagement, visit to a site, user search, and even a purchase equates to more and more data. Data is stored in different systems and is being used by various media partners for multiple advertising strategies. We are swimming in massive amounts of data and have very few tools that create easy, actionable answers. With the right media measurement methodology in place, marketers can follow the consumer path from start to finish. We live in a world where it is almost impossible to live 60 seconds without seeing an ad. We have outdoor TV and the ever-expanding digital universe of online display, video, and mobile. The rise of digital advertising creates more questions and sometimes concerns about what, where, when, and how marketers should spend their media dollars. Without a solid attribution model in place, everything is called into question. Which creative was shown? Was it seen above the fold, below the fold? Who delivered the ads and in what time? Was it a publisher buy or purchased on an exchange? Did the campaign use search data, demographic, psychographic, and or site activity as part of the media buying process? And how do we measure the impact of advertising with so many factors in play?
So attribution, how did we get here? It's really more of an evolution rather than a revolution. Today, what we see at C3 Metrics is we see, on average, 32 multiple touch points of advertising. Who's getting credit for all the stuff that's in the upper funnel? The answer is nobody.
So attribution is the process of taking a conversion or a sale or something of economic value and attributing it back, distributing the credit for it to the marketing touch points that were measured prior to that conversion.
If you think about what a CMO's problem is, they're trying to manage holistically a campaign, a set of objectives with their audience, with their potential customers, or with their actual customers, regardless of the silo. So, whether it's search or display or video or mobile or social.
The opportunity for businesses is to move beyond the notion of having a perfect answer and instead be able to take data that allows them to make directionally and incrementally better decisions. As much as we talk about how last click is a problem today, it's enabled incredible optimization, right? Just think about the performance that you're able to get out of search advertising based on last click attribution. But last click, everyone agrees, is imperfect. So if we can just begin to think about how to move incrementally beyond that without having to focus on the perfect answer, we can really begin to see those gains.
The CMO needs to optimize where they're spending money, how they're spending money, how campaigns across different sectors interrelate to one another. And historically, that's just never been possible. We never had attribution. We never had cross-channel attribution because we didn't have the available data.
In a perfect world, every time you show an ad to an individual, you would know exactly how you influence the consumer. You would know which ads were working, how they were working, what the action was, and how you should adjust the media mix in real time across every medium and with which data.
Okay. Well done. Thank you very much. Welcome to Attribution Revolution. I'm James. I'm with Magnetic. Thank you all so much for coming. We appreciate you taking your time out of your evening tonight. I'm going to start with a couple of words about why we're throwing the event. I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we're going to go. Throughout the evening, I'd like you to participate in the panel as much as possible. I'm going to be asking you questions. If you don't ask the questions you want answers to, we may not answer them. So please do. At Magnetic, we do search retargeting, right? So in other words, we remember what you're searching for. We've got our tags on millions of URLs. We store it in a database. We might know that you're looking for a flat panel TV, and then we're going to call someone up at Panasonic and say, wouldn't you like to serve an ad to someone who's looking for a flat panel TV? So if that's what we do, why are we throwing an attribution panel? Because that's not what we do. And the reason is we generally acquire new customers for our clients, as opposed to retarget old customers or existing customers. And as we've been selling our product, and I've been with Magnetic for nearly a year now, so not fully a year. As we've been selling our product, we found ourselves being pitted against a lot of site retargeting companies and a lot of people who were lower down in the funnel, who were remarketing to existing customers. And our first strategy against that was to offer the product ourselves. If we can do search retargeting, we can sure as hell do site retargeting. That's actually pretty trivial compared to search retargeting. But as we got more sophisticated about it, and we started talking to people about why are you valuing someone who's already your customer at the same price as someone who is a brand new customer, never spent $1 with you? Why are you assigning the same value to that? We started to think much more about attribution. And one of the things we found was that when the customer was working with an attribution vendor, they spent more money with Magnetic. So we would really like you to use one of these customers or their competitors. We're okay with that too, because it makes us look better. So that's sort of cards face up on the table about why we're throwing this event. With that, I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm going to start with Bill, who's with Google. You couldn't really have a digital event without Google being present. They are clearly the biggest player in the space. They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. And Bill, you've been with Google for
about 6 years.
6 years, so it's in his DNA. And just in case we should forget, that's almost half as long as Google has been around, right? So, so we all think of Google as this massively old company, but actually, it was a startup as well once. And then we have John, who is with Adobe, and I think Adobe's done an amazing job marketing to corporate America. It's in digital advertising. If you're a Fortune 500 company, you can almost say you won't go wrong by buying Adobe. It's kind of like you used to do with IBM. They've got Omniture and Efficient Frontier, and really sort of do terrifically well in those Fortune 500 companies. And you have the longest title I've ever heard of. What is it?
I do. Product Manager for Predictive Marketing Solutions for Adobe's Digital Marketing Suite. Say that 3 times fast.
Okay. There will be a quiz later. Open bar for a week if you can remember that. Next up, I'm going to go with Paul, who's with Odometry. I'm a little bit of a geek at heart, and so I aspire to be like Paul, who is a massive believer in quantitative analysis for everything. If there's a problem, I think Paul probably believes that there's a quantitative solution to it. Absolutely. So, and last out, I couldn't have a panel without a troublemaker. So,
thanks.
Yeah, I'm going there already. Okay. I've got Jeff from C3, used to be a chiropractor, full-time musician, member of the Magic Castle in LA. You should ask him to do tricks. And of course, founder of C3 Metrics. So that's our panel. Thank you very much. I'm going to start out by asking John to just, actually, you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to do a little poll of you guys in the audience. How many of you here are involved in digital media buying or analysis? I'm going to guess most of you, right? Good. Anyone involved in offline? Yes.
All the back.
Oh, nice. A couple over there. Very good. Anyone didn't put your hand up who's not involved with us? All right. That's all right. Good. Okay, so that's who our audience is. Mostly digital, offline in the back. I want to start out now with John. I want to talk to you about, I would like you to just frame the question for us. What is attribution? What are we talking about?
So first things first, we need to be all on the same page with attribution. So I think most of us probably understand attribution is really, it's very simple. It's the allocation of credit to a marketing effort, whether that's offline or online. Now we're going to be speaking mostly in the context of digital, but it's really just that, the allocation of credit across the entire conversion funnel to any sort of marketing effort that's taken place.
Excellent. Right? Pretty clear. just as a sort of reality check, raise of hands again, how many people here are measuring their digital media spend by post-click? None of you? One, couple of you. How about post-view? Couple more. And how many of you are actually using an attribution vendor or doing some real sort of fractional attribution? Yeah, nice. So it's sort of even. I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is for the boys in the back is offline. So I'm going to ask you all to sort of opine on this, and let's just go from you Paul across the panel. How does offline affect digital? So there's so much going on, the television, radio, all of these things, and they're clearly having an impact online. So if you're just measuring the online, how do you think, how does that all work?
It's a great question. So I think what we find with our clients is we typically start by saying, let's not boil the ocean right out of the gate. Let's focus on digital attribution because you have the benefit of user-level data, typically, that allows you to have this granularity of data where you can then do attribution more effectively. But the reality is that offline media is having an impact, right? TV is, 10 times bigger than all of online
at least
together. I think it's 10 to 1 about
right?
in the U.S., I think. And so to ignore that influence, is at your peril to a certain extent. Now, look, we have clients where a majority of their media spend is all digital, so then offline's not that important. But we also have a lot of clients that spend a ton on offline. And there are ways where you can bring that data in. And I think that's what's more exciting to me is not how we bring the data in today. It's really the belief I have that offline media is just going to start looking more like online media, and you're going to start getting that data at a granular level. I'm not a big believer in, they're not here, so I'll mention it. The Nielsen's and the ComScore is really focusing on these online gross rating point approaches. I think that's kind of looking in the rearview mirror. That's like trying to take all these failed or inaccurate metrics in the offline world and trying to force feed it onto online. We as an industry should demand better. And I think that offline is going to look more like online, and so then the opportunity is going to be you're going to have this user level data, and then you're going to be able to see all the media someone sees and understand what's driving people to convert not just online but also offline. And when you do that, then things get really exciting.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that if you go to any TV conferences, and I used to be in the TV world in a whole different part of life. Before the magic, part of the magic, and there. And at those conferences, if I look around the room, most of us here are like under the age of 50, but at those conferences, everyone was over the age of 50. So TV is like, which is predominantly most of offline, it's very old. And the way they look at measurement, TV measurement hasn't updated itself in like 50 years. They haven't changed anything at all in terms of measurement. But the reality is this, the problem that you run into if you're in the digital space and whatever attribution model you employ, you have the perfect attribution model. So here, let's say you have a client that does $1 million of sales a month, let's say. So here you have it all perfectly attributed. So now it's the end of the month, you know exactly what channel contributed to all this in digital, and you hand it all to the CMO. It eventually makes its way up there. And then on the TV side, guess what? They're taking credit for that $1 million in sale. So at the end of the day, the CMO is still stuck with, we only did $1 million in sales, but digital says they got all $1 million, and TV said they got all $1 million. So what do I do with the marketing mix? And oh, by the way, I only have this job for 16 months. I'm not going to do a damn thing. I'm not going to change it at all. And the big problem that we've seen from the marketing scientists that we've been working with is that the way that they've looked at marketing mix modeling is that when digital came along, they plugged it in as just another channel. So, when they plugged it in just like radio. And radio, TV, print, out of home, all of these things are one way. You send out the message and that's it. Digital is two-way communication. So it's really unique. And what we see as the future in terms of measuring media is that we see that, nobody could have predicted that everybody was going to be carrying a small little piece of the internet in their pocket, even 10 years ago. No one ever knew that that was going to happen. And so essentially it's like we're all carrying these people meters, these like Arbitron, Nielsen people meters. And when I see an ad or I interact with a brand that I get excited about, guess what? I'm going to tweet about it. I'm going to go visit their site. And so I can pick up all of that stuff. So it's almost like you can capture all of the effects of offline media in digital. So digital is kind of, not only is it an advertising medium, but it's a way to really measure TV. The key is getting all the old folks that are running TV to understand that and not be afraid of that. And once the marketing mix models start to adjust and to accompany both the two-way communication that digital has, you'll actually start to see the marketing mixes shift. Now, of those of us in digital, we get excited. We see, oh my God, somebody is spending an extra 1% in digital or 5% more in digital. Well, they're spending $80 million a year in TV. It's nothing to them. But once these models start to adjust, we'll actually start to see more and more money come to digital because it's so much better in terms of measurement.
Yeah, I think it's clear that there is a disconnect there, right? There's one world that operates according to one set of rules and another that operates according, to perhaps a much better set of rules. I think is often the case with digital, and I think at Google, we see that as a challenge, right? We've created, what is one of the most measurable forms of advertising, but yet in some ways find ourselves not being able to kind of speak the same language about it. And I think in many ways attribution and this thought of looking at the full marketing funnel actually offers a kind of new opportunity for digital to engage in that conversation on its own terms, right? So last click attribution tends to focus a lot on demand harvesting, right? You're not focused on new customers, as James was saying. You're not focused on demand generation, which is a lot of what these other media have been more focused on, and perhaps their measurement is a little bit more guided towards, right? But with attribution and really beginning to think about how all of your digital media throughout the marketing funnel is working, I think what you'll begin to find is that you as a marketer begin to think about digital much more broadly. And I think that's where a lot of the opportunity around attribution lies, is that it makes digital into a much more complete marketing channel.
Yeah. So I think Adobe is actually a great example of this. From our own company's perspective, if you would have talked to anybody from Adobe, especially our CMO, 5 years ago, you would have noticed that a large chunk of our marketing dollars were actually spent in the offline world, which is kind of ironic for a digital content creation type company and optimization. If you look at our marketing spend today, Adobe globally, about 70% of our marketing is digital. 70% of all the marketing dollars. And why is that? Why have we shifted from 70% 5-6 years ago being spent in the offline world, 30% digital, to the actual inverse of that, towards the digital world? Well, it's because of the influence and that digital has, and the way that we are able to actually attribute success to it. The offline and digital worlds, though, are coming together. With the smartphones that we do have and the ability for us to, scan QR codes and things like that, we're able to in that moment then attribute that offline sort of marketing effort to a digital experience. And so, the trend is for more spending to go to the digital world, though the ability for us to better measure the offline influence that it has in our total marketing mix for the CMO is going to become more digital in nature.
That what we've seen is that the use of QR codes, it tends to be very localized. So some of our clients in the UK, over in the UK, QR codes are almost used on almost every single advertising campaign. So every print piece, every single business has a QR code out in front of it. Whereas in the US, it's very limited. It's like, one campaign will do it, one campaign won't. So it kind of gives a mixed message to the consumer. So now, you don't see a TV ad without a URL in it. So everybody knows, if I see a TV ad, I know there's going to be a URL at least at the end of the ad so I can remember to get there. The QR codes, it's like 50-50. I think if more advertisers were to start adopting them, then consumers would start utilizing them more.
A great example of that has been Japan. So talking about localization of that, the effectiveness, I have done some research, and the effectiveness of QR codes, looking at real data in Japan as opposed to other geographies is quite a bit different. It's much more effective over there because they have had that technology for quite some time. Not to mention every magazine that they read, every ad that they see has an associated QR code in most cases.
Any other questions about online and offline and combining the two? Moving on to our next question.
I think we had one back here.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, when you take a look at attribution by individual channel, we've been talking a lot about digital, we've been talking about offline.
Yeah.
And everyone's recently been talking about the transmedia revolution. You've got an individual on their iPad, they're watching television, they're tweeting from their smartphone simultaneously. So how do you address the notion in terms of doing analytics in a meaningful way? The traditional notion is isolating a particular channel, getting the most out of that. Right now it's a correlate, right? It's a holistic phenomenon between people using all this media in a full 360 kind of model. And then how do you ultimately relate that to ROI and putting together a media mix that works within this transmedia kind of sensibility?
I guess there's almost two questions in there. The first one is, how do you track this media across different devices? And then the second thing is, once you track it, how do you measure it effectively in a test and control environment? On the tracking side, there's some really interesting things happening out there. You're exactly right. We have clients that want to track mobile usage, and we do that. But what we're essentially doing is we're looking at mobile usage, mobile conversions on a mobile device right now. Now, there are opportunities, and there are companies out there. It's the same companies that are providing opportunities for all of you guys to target users across devices using that same technology to measure media across devices and conversions. And when you do that, we're doing attribution in the digital space against some unique identifier, user ID. If that user ID can see media across devices, well then all the same methodologies we all have can be utilized across those broader digital channels, across broader digital devices. So the mechanism for tracking that is coming and in process.
Do you have clients who are doing it today?
We have clients we're starting to do that with. It's pretty early. I don't know. I'd love to hear what these guys say about that. The test versus control is a broader issue, not just across devices, but there's no Uber ad server that allows you on a unique identifier to serve ads across all these different channels. And so that makes the concept of test and control really difficult. I'll punt. These guys might have better answers. And what we do is we start with a client engagement. We say measurement's going to be really important. How are we going to go into this engagement so coming out of it we can have a tangible roadmap? How are we going to determine if it's successful or not? A lot of times that depends on the client.
I'll just add in real quick, the tracking users across multiple devices. I think once we see some either court cases come down or some issues from the FTC start to get resolved, I think you'll see a lot of technology that will start to all of a sudden jump out of nowhere and come out and say, oh my God, look at this, what we can do. But I think there's folks that are kind of sitting on the sideline waiting for those issues to be resolved. And once those are done, the problems that you reflect where someone goes from one device to another, those things will all go away.
And the thing I would just add there is that the sort of cross-media notion quickly jumps into cross-device and all of these other things, but a lot of folks are still measuring search and display separately, right, and are double counting on that, right? And there's an enormous opportunity to just improve that. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I'll just add, since we're just going down the line here, it seems like. Adobe, we do have a visitor stitching solution that does help do that, especially for visitors that have authenticated. Now, we all know that authenticated visitors are definitely the minority of the visitors that may visit any particular digital site. And so, with what you're talking about, stitching all this together, I know that when Beyonce announced her baby bump, I was looking at the TV and I was tweeting about this, right? And
me too, by the way.
Absolutely. Right? I can't believe she's pregnant.
For me, it was Tom Brady
this
during
is
a
Beyonce
touchdown.
we're talking about here. So, I mean, being able to connect that across, right? I'm on my iPad, I'm on my phone, I'm watching it on TV. We just had the VMAs a few weeks ago. The Beyonce baby bump was a year ago, but I was still waiting for Lady Gaga to come out looking like a man again. So, yeah, I mean, this is something that's extremely important. And, the technology is there. We are waiting, right, for some things to be kind of worked out from a privacy perspective. But, there are ways for us to leverage, econometric type modeling techniques. If you have sequence and you have correlation, right, you can move along that path from not just pure correlation to more of a causal model. And until you reach really, testing and experimentation, you haven't reached, pure pure causality, but there is a huge opportunity there. There are two revolutions or evolutions, however you want to think of it, in being able to stitch across form factors, as well as being able to algorithmically attribute success across all the different channels.
All right, let's move on to the next one. Yeah.
Just had a quick follow-up on that. So I know we're talking about cross-device, but we all know that cookies expire pretty quickly, and some people are doing some interesting things based on digital fingerprinting, so we can understand how a user behaves, not just across device, but even within a certain device across different browsers. And a lot of people might use IE for certain things, and then jump over to Firefox when they're browsing personal, or use Chrome for something that's in a favorites bar or something like that. So why are more attribution providers not working on that solution, which I think is even more lower hanging fruit than cross-device?
I think Jeff nailed it, which is there's the privacy issue with some of those.
Yeah, I think when you say the phrase digital fingerprinting,
scary.
All of our general counsels freak out. We tighten up our butt cheeks. But what I would say is that if I'm an e-commerce site and I have all of this data that I've collected, so I'm an e-commerce site, I've got all of this mass amount of data. Assume I have my own ad server, I'm collecting all of this click data. If I put all this data together, I would be able to string together, without using the term digital fingerprinting, I would be able to string together specific users from the raw data that I put together. It's just a massive amount of data. So I think that there's a lot of sites that are doing it. They're not calling it digital fingerprinting. And I think, again, once the privacy issues are resolved, I think you'll see a massive shift come together.
And I can tell you, and I'm not going to name any company names, but I know that there are companies that are already doing that. They just can't sell you the service. So they're doing it because it's good for optimization and it's good for other things, but they cannot turn around and say that they're doing it for fear of that.
That's right.
But isn't the technology also related to the previous one that you mentioned, which is the unique user ID? Because the unique user ID is, providing the answer to that too. It allows you to, match or at least identify the user within the same device that uses multiple, browser, but also across devices.
Yeah.
That's part of the solution.
So I'm going to jump in there and just say yes, but there are other ways to do it. There are a million other ways you do not have to have a device ID. And that's what scares the bejesus out of everybody.
Yeah.
Every company here, ours included, and a bunch of others, can do exactly what you want to do, and we are not allowed to sell it.
As digital marketers, we could rant a little bit. The digital media industry is held to a standard that's so much higher than any other media channel has ever been held to as it relates to PII. Now, part of it is maybe it's somewhat justified because the volume of data and the amount of data you have, but I mean, look at the household information that every data company has on users, and yet we can't have an anonymous cookie that has all this data, so it's crazy. I mean, we're held to a different standard.
We are. I got a couple other things we want to cover, so I'm going to
so everybody can relax
force you to move on. I want to talk about implementation issues. So from what I've heard, it's not that easy always to implement it. You can run across a variety of different hurdles as you go to try to implement this kind of model. So starting with you, Jeff, and then moving to Paul, just so we don't continue to go that way. Mix it up a bit.
So, we've been at this now for about 4.5 years, and when we first started with it, we figured that every client that got started would want the full everything, the greatest of everything. And so, what we found is when you try to start from that step of saying, hey, you want the absolute best. Why wouldn't you want the best? There's a lot of things that get in the way. So what we found is from an implementation standpoint of view, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later in terms of issues and problems that can happen in an organization. But what we found is in terms of implementation is that if we can start small, because it doesn't matter that somebody says, yeah, I want this. Sometimes there's other people in an organization who say, well, I really don't know about this. I don't know if this is the best idea. So what we find on our end is we start small in terms of implementing, layering in one piece that gives you from where you are here at 100% last click to where maybe now you're at viewable impressions, where you're only giving credit to ads that have been seen. Well, now you've got an incremental increase. Now all of a sudden you're doing much better. And then you move up from there and you're still at 100% last click, but maybe you layer in some rules, where maybe you skip branded search when it's at the last click, because that indicates the person has already made a decision to buy or integrate with your brand. So you skip it and you get out of the way. Maybe you layer in some latency rules. So if a converter, the last click shows up in the last 30 seconds because they had another browser window open. Have you guys noticed that more and more sites are refreshing ads like every 30 seconds, like the Drudge Report has done for years, even Facebook does it. So what ends up happening is that right before that conversion, 2 or 3 other ads could pop up in a split second. I don't know about you, I have like probably 5 or 6, at least, maybe even more tabs open at a time. So if I go in to buy something, somebody jumps in at the last second. So there's a lot of things you can do and still keep someone at last click, where the organization will say, oh my God, this attribution stuff is working, and yet they still haven't even done attribution yet. They're still at last click, but they're seeing an incremental increase. Once they get that and they buy into the platform, they buy into it, then we move very simply. Our philosophy has been a very simple, rules-based approach, not an algorithm. Definitely different from Paul's company, which is great, because you get a choice here. But our philosophy is that last click, the reason that everybody's still in last click is because it's so damn simple to understand. It's real easy. I can explain it to a CMO in 2 seconds on the back of a napkin. He can take that same napkin and without even drawing it out, show it to the CEO who understands it, who can then go and explain it in a board meeting and talk about it for an hour. It's real easy. Well, we go from that and we talk about splitting up credit between certain partners based on rules that the client has and laying in business rules. That's real easy to understand as well, and we find that we don't get much pushback from that. But we find the nice stair-step approach enables an organization to kind of move their way up into getting to full funnel attribution.
So I disagree. No.
Come on.
No, there's some aspects that are true, which is clients can only digest so much. I think we look at it, though, where that first bite can be probably a little bit more significant. First and foremost, about getting the data right. We think get the data, get the user level data, get the comprehensive user level data, use an algorithmic model that's going to be accurate. And then you might step into it from the standpoint of starting with a couple of channels and expanding to other channels. You know, start with digital first, for example. Don't try to boil the ocean with digital and offline altogether. But we find that approach works better. I think we just think that an algorithmic approach is going to give you more, the more accurate, more real answer of what's happening. And once you provide that insight, it's how then you work with the client so they can pick from all that insight the low-hanging fruit that they can implement and get results against. So we like to tend to show more, get more data, more insight at our disposal, have a lot of that low-hanging fruit, and then pick from that and show results from that. Build reinforcement like, wow, that was easy. Wow, that generated results. And then we have all that stuff already. We just keep picking all that low-hanging fruit from there.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. So I agree with the last comment. I disagree with the original. And the reason is because if you know that something is, though it might be simple, right, I get that. But if we know it's erroneous in the first place, why stick to something that's erroneous? I think it's okay to incrementally add additional data to complete the picture a little bit more. But we all know there's a funnel, right? We know there's a bottom of the funnel, there's a top of the funnel. And if you start with something simple like last click, then you might end up making decisions, right? There's a reason why the average lifespan of a CMO is 16 to 18 months. I think it's because they started with last click a little bit. And so, right? And then they're trying to get ultimately to more of an algorithmic, better understanding of the total influence that each touch point has, right? There's 32 touch points in the average, leading up to conversion. Well, if we remember the one and forget the other 31, then we're going to start to have problems because we're not nurturing leads downstream. Because we're not taking care of the upstream.
Questions about implementation? Yeah.
I totally get that, for clients it's a new thing and they don't want to, jump completely into the water all at once. But how do you find that right mix of ensuring that you're doing enough to see the results in the back end? If you're too conservative up front, the ROI might not be there in the back.
I think the client's going to move it along. You're going to see how much they're ready to handle and how much they're willing to push. And that's really it. They will let you know. And you also have to understand that a lot of times it's, we get approached by one agency out of maybe 5 or 6 that the client has. So they're the ones that are pushing for it. They've got to sell it in to the client, and then you got to get buy-in from the other agencies as well. And just a rebuttal to what you said earlier. So it's, the argument on last click would be, just like what was said in the video earlier on, is that I could say, if I'm the largest chicken producer in the world, I would say, well, last click I've sold a lot of chickens. And one of the things that I learned many years ago was that these big brands, they have a belief, a standard datum that flows throughout their entire organization, which is it's more important to protect the brand than to promote the brand. And one of the things that I found throughout the years is that you can't go in an organization like your Paul Revere screaming and yelling, saying, the British are coming, the British are coming, the British are coming. My God, we got attribution. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You got to move slow with big brands because, even though we know that this works, all of us here have got case studies to prove that this stuff works. You got to move slow because otherwise someone's going to lose their job at the end of the day. That's what we found.
So I would just add one more thing to that, which is that I think I would generally probably side a little bit more with Jeff, mostly from the perspective. There you go, Jeff. I'm here for you. But generally from the perspective that we find that a lot of things get blocked when clients are looking for the sort of perfect answer or the perfect model, and where we see people having success is when they're able to look at different attribution models and see those as opportunities to invest in things that they haven't invested in before. So you don't get hung up on having a sort of financial accounting metric that at the end of the day you can say this is the be-all and end-all CPA, but instead begin to say, this upper funnel channel looks like it's working really, really great, right? So let's try more of it and see what happens.
I guess the only thing I'll go back to is I don't know if we answered the question. The question was, how do you know if you're doing enough? And I think the thing that we've found is sometimes you have to push the clients a little bit harder than they want to be pushed. As a direct marketer for 20 years, when you do a test, you want to make sure you peel away everything other than the thing you're testing so that when you come out of it, you know definitively it either works or it doesn't work. And the risk you have of moving too slowly is you will move so slowly that you'll be irrelevant and you won't be able to see anything. And then you end up, the client says, well, that didn't work. Well, why didn't it work? It's because we didn't push hard enough or we didn't push enough to be able to really read results. So that's the only thing, just to push back on incrementalism. You gotta push enough to be able to see if it's really going to budge the needle.
Yeah. The good news is that if you have a conservative client, you go with Google or C3. If you've got someone who wants a revolution, you go with a Adometry or a Adobe. That's it.
The one thing. The one thing that I would like to add to that is that our customers, we service Fortune 500 customers. If we waited for them to tell us exactly what they wanted to do, they would no longer view us as really a strategic partner to really help drive their business. And so we view it as they don't always know exactly what direction they need to go. They just know what end result they want to see at the end of the day. And so as a strategic partner in providing really best practices from an industry perspective, we don't wait for them to just tell us, right? We really sit down with them and begin to strategically plan out what they need to do next in order to really compete within their industry.
Another question.
It's more of a comment than a question. I feel like I'm right in the middle between Jeff and Paul on this discussion because, working at a media agency where we see, across the board different kinds of clients, big brands, and you see the slow movers and you see the people who are ready to jump in, both feet. I would say that from the beginning, it becomes a political conversation with our clients because traditionally, when you start moving from last click into attribution, you're moving away from search to maybe upstream display viewability, right? So you end up, with a very different shift in the organization as far as how they're attributing their budget.
Right.
And so you have now a tear between the search team over there at the client and the display team over there saying, hey, we should get more credit, we should get more budget. Okay. And so there's a benefit to both
going a little slower so the client can swallow this and make the changes politically over time in the organizations. And I would say that is a very big brand kind of way. But then I've also seen some companies that are nimble, and they're not necessarily smaller brands, I won't say that. So I will say there are some companies that are much more nimble as far as their mindset around being able to shift with whatever results come out of the attribution. And so I think there's a different solution for different clients, but you have to know what kind of political environment there is between the different teams that are the owners of the different channels.
Yeah, that's right. Politics is always, never should be underestimated is probably a better way to put it.
I have kind of a two-part question. So the first part is from the folks on the algorithmic side. Can you share your methodology to get to that algorithm? So obviously it is much easier to get a client to understand what you're talking about when you talk about rules-based decisioning. So can you share that? And the second part of that is when we work with a lot of our clients, the challenges we have with these discussions is that political challenge, which is if there's silos. So the reality is there is no incentive for business units to work together to really work towards a strong attribution model that is realistic, because it could hurt one of them in order to find it. So that, I don't know if those go together or not in terms of your methodology.
But let's start with the first question first.
Methodology.
Methodology.
Yes.
What is how does your algorithm
In
work?
3 words. No.
That would be impressive.
That would be great, wouldn't it? I guess at a high level, it's a data-driven model, so we let the data tell us how much credit to allocate versus using predetermined rules. Last event attribution is a predetermined rule. It's just not accurate. We think a lot of other predetermined rules move you more towards the right direction, but they never get at what's really driving conversion. So data-driven is key. Now, how do we do that? Well, I could spend an hour talking about it, or I could try to convey it in 30 seconds. I'll try the 30-second route. It's essentially like test and target to a certain extent. It's like multivariate segmentation analysis or lift analysis. We look at how a path converts when a media element is in the path, and we look at how that path converts when a media element is not in the path. Simple concept, incredibly difficult, and big data problem to solve when you look at all the different permutations in the data. That's just in a nutshell our methodology.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. So, I mean, I will give them 3 words here is simulate, test, learn. I mean, that's basically what he was.
Ooh, oppressive.
15 love.
I had to like add something to it. But that's really what it comes down to. Is it is data driven. It leveraging econometric type techniques and other sort of advanced statistical techniques. I think a key part of that is also exposing. The last thing that any customer is going to accept and trust is any sort of black box model. The reason is because they don't understand it, right? And so there are ways in which we don't expect our customers necessarily to just all of a sudden understand, data mining and statistics in one day, right? But I think there are certain things that you can do to expose the nature of that data through comparisons, through visualizations that will help them better understand. And then through the experience of the simulate, test, and then learn, they begin to build that trust in that. But I completely agree with both comments that the political issue and the context of an organization is very important. You do have to, in that sense, maybe not go as risky, and you do maybe need to find some sort of middle ground.
The one thing I would add is that even in approaches that take, what was being described, you're still ultimately trying to separate causation and correlation, right? If we look at people who, let's say we look at people who saw display ads and search ads, right? And then we just look at people who saw search ads and say, well, the people with display and search converted at a higher rate, so I'm going to attribute the difference in that to display. Well, maybe people who see a lot of display ads spend a lot of time online, so they see more ads and they're more likely to purchase online, so they have a higher conversion rate, right? That sort of mix of factors is extremely difficult to separate, right? And you can't set up a perfect experiment where you can. There's no way today to say across search, display, and social and everything else, let me shut off something for one group and shut off something for everybody else. So I think my view is that you can't really do that. So what do we do and acknowledge that we're not actually going to have this type of perfect experimental result and move on, given that we're not going to get that perfect answer?
So I'll chime in here as the non-algorithm person of the group here. And what I'll say is, the definition of enough is more. And I can't tell you how many clients came to us when we started C3 almost 4.5 years ago, looking for the perfect model. And they are still out there spending 20, 30, 40, $50 million a month and their media spend, and still not doing attribution because they're waiting for the perfect model. And as a group, I have to say, ad tech as a whole has the biggest hard-on I've ever seen for algorithms ever. It's unbelievable because it's never seems to be enough. So the way that we look at it at C3 is we use a rules-based approach that we start with, because remember, all of you, or at least the majority of the people we first talked to, are all on 100% last click, and they want to go from here, to the bottom of the stadium stairs, and they think that they can jump from here all the way down and not break a leg, and you will break a leg. So we do an incremental approach with a rules-based, and then once you want more of that and you're spending enough money, well, by golly, you're doing offline stuff. And that's where the big folks have to come in, the marketing scientists. And they come in with all their crazy impulse response functions and vector autoregression and all this sophisticated stuff that is way over my head, and figure it all out at that point. But that's after you've moved off of last click. And that's really what this is all about, is getting you off of last click. But if you want an algorithm, talk to these guys.
Oh, look, we got a whole bunch more questions. I'll go down here to American Express.
I'm trying to build a bridge between those two because I have a similar conversation today with my boss. And like two things, like one is political and the other one like the ideal. And actually, I'm in a risk department, so my bosses probably will not like me for saying this. But I remember that day when Google actually implemented Google Plus in their algorithm. And that was like, I think Larry Page cut his hand that day because Google was like always, everything is algorithmic, everything. I mean, any sort of thing, it can come back to an algorithm. And they, because I guess Facebook pressure, they implemented that into, the social thing into it. So I think both worlds have to be together. And actually, I'm coming from a country where I saw that model fail. Whenever you trust a model, they will fail at some point. And I don't want to be the one responsible for that.
Kind of lose his job. I think one thing too is to accept is that there is no perfect algorithm, right? We have to all accept that every algorithm is going to be error prone. It's just a matter. You might have an algorithm and I have an algorithm. Who's got the best algorithm, right? And the fact is they both have errors. And so I do believe. In everything that's been said, I know we're kind of representing very bipolar sort of views, but in reality, it is something kind of in between. You do have there is a natural progression that moves from the highly erroneous last click approach to an algorithmic approach, but you do have to move away from making sure you need to make sure that algorithm is not a complete black box, that it's providing some level of intelligence and learning through that process.
So I have a question that kind of ties into a couple comments that you guys were saying. So, so C3 was saying something about how some of the rules are based on some on-site activity, like within 30 seconds of conversion or something like that. And then Google was also saying something about tying in kind of actual user activity to this conversion process, such as someone a subset of users that might spend more time online seeing display ads. And my question to the algorithmic people up there is, how are you tying in on-site activity to your algorithm? Because if you're looking at your algorithm blind to on-site activity, using an example of affiliates, let's say, it could be that people that touch the affiliate touch point happen to be, 90% of those people could already be on the checkout page where they see promo code box and they open up a new tab and they search, your site name, coupon code, and that's why you're seeing a higher conversion rate out of that subset of users because they're already on the checkout page, where the people who didn't use that touch point might have never even clicked the add to cart button. So how are you tying in on-site activity to make sure that you're using an apples-to-apples comparison when you're comparing these click paths and not being blind and just looking at touch points without seeing what the users are doing on the site?
So just to keep us on schedule, I'm going to have just you answer that.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll be here all night.
Okay. So at least what we do, and it depends on the client implementation and how much data we can get, We have an ad tag and a page tag. Ad tag gives us all the ad media data elements, and page tag gives us all the page tag data elements. Many of our clients, and more of them, are having us place the page tags on more and more of their site so that we pick up that site activity. And what we've seen that's actually really interesting is some of our clients are actually consider parts of their site really more advertising as opposed to conversion funnel. And so once we gather the data, we can work with the client to figure out, well, what side of it is it something that drives someone ultimately to convert, or is it part of the conversion funnel? And we can run attribution across those different scenarios and see what works. So we are starting to take that data into account.
That sounds like a rule.
Here's the data.
All right.
I just have a question. You guys have been talking about last click so much, and in a campaign where we look at post-click and post-impression, we're set up right now in last ad, obviously, to have click always trump view through. That said, a lot of MTA methodologies are saying that they're equal, that click doesn't always trump impression. So I'm curious, with an impression touch point versus a click touch point, your view on that and how that affects certain methodologies that you put in place.
So the next topic that I wanted to cover was what key performance indicators to use. Seems like it's a perfect segue. I'm going to have Bill, you kick it off.
Sure. So, so on impressions versus clicks, I mean, I think that that rule of thumb has served the industry pretty well, but it's also resulted in display being measured by things like click-through rate, right, which doesn't necessarily correlate to the quality of the display or what it is. I'll be honest, I actually don't have, people would love to be able to say, well, what's like the ratio, right? If there's a click and there's an impression, how do you distribute the credit? Is it like 10 to 1? Is it 20 to 1 or whatever? I haven't found that. Actually, I think that the closest things that can get you to that kind of answer are the sort of, withhold and test type of scenarios. But again, I think what we've found is that, partial credit in certain circumstances, whether or not it is some precise number or not, it gives you indications about which of those display ads are actually correlated with your converters, right? And that can help you prioritize which sites to advertise on, which creatives are working better, and things like that. So I guess my opinion would be to steer away from having some precise notion of what is the equivalence of an impression and a click.
But when such a high proportion of it is coming from it's part of the methodology that needs to be put in place and seems to be ignored a lot of times.
Sure. So like in the the attribution models that we provide, right, will allow you to do things like take a path and give impressions 1/10 as much credit as a click, right, or or 1/5 as much credit, right, and see how that credit ultimately ends up being distributed based on that, right? How much does that actually change the value of your display campaign? And then when you dig in and see, particular sites might have, dramatically higher performance given, that small amount of credit, right? And that will help you begin to prioritize those places that you advertise.
I think there's actually two questions in that one. The first is an I/O question that has to do with, whatever the deals of the I/O are. Is it like a 14-day view-through credit and a 30-day click-through credit, and then whichever one is there wins? And so whatever the terms of the I/O are, you got to live with those. Now, obviously, you can change those month to month, but whatever those are, you have to deal with. The other piece of that, and the reason that you're seeing so much view-through credit, is because of the proliferation of display and because a lot of ad tech companies will know when the prevalence of people are to convert, and they'll go and purposely buy tons of inventory way down below the fold, and they'll blow out tons of cookies. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when an ad tech company used to blow out tons of inventory in Instant Messenger. I won't say the name of the company. And there used to be tons of cookies out there. And we used to see it because all of a sudden we'd see the number of impressions shoot up to tens of millions over a couple of hours and then die down to nothing for 6 days because someone was doing a 7-day view-through credit. I think the other piece of that is this whole concept of viewable impressions and viewable conversions. So on viewable impressions is on the buy side, how you're buying media. Meaning, so if I have an ad that shows up on Yahoo's homepage and it's actually in view, I have to pay for that ad. But if there's an ad that's way down below the fold on USA Today, I don't have to pay for that ad. But if someone goes to Yahoo, they see the ad, they go to USA Today, they don't see it, and then they convert, USA Today gets credit for that ad because your conversion gatekeeper is not talking to the viewable impression thing. So now it's the end of the month. What ends up happening? Well, You paid for more ads on Yahoo, got less credit than USA Today, and so now it's time to reallocate. You're looking at the ROI. You'd say to the Yahoo person, say, your numbers suck. I'm cutting your budget, and I'm giving it all to USA Today. And that's what ends up happening. That's the concept of what we call viewable conversions. So you have to be able to look at all your view-through credit and throw out the ones that have never been seen. Once you throw those out, there's not as many there as there were before. And then you add in a rule that says that if they show up within 30 seconds before the person hits a conversion page, they're not there. Or if they're a couponer, you throw them out as well.
So you don't include non-converters?
What's that?
So non-converters are taken out of your methodology?
When you say, yeah, exactly, yeah. Throw them out. Yeah.
There you go. FYI, 8:20 p.m. Okay, then I'm going to skip through. I'm going to skip through to my favorite question, and then we'll open it up for questions about more or less anything. My favorite question is, who are the losers? So, because we all want to go negative at some point, right? So, who, when you go to a client, and you all have to have a story about this because you've all seen it, right? You've implemented your technology on a campaign or across a bunch of things. Overall, what's the trend? Which parts of the media mix perform the worst? Which most often do you see saying no? We'll just go that way. Actually, no, we won't go that way. Yeah, let's go the other way.
I'm always last. But
yeah, you get to go first this time. Come on, John.
So we've already kind of discussed this, a little bit, and I'm not going to say it's because it's not effective, but one of the losers that I've seen, and a good example of this has been the recent change in relationship between General Motors and Facebook. So one of the losers today is social. Why is it a loser? And it's because it's difficult to measure the return on your investment, your return on ad spend, the return on the effort that's taken to manage a social community and presence. And really driving downstream conversion on a website, right? It requires a lot of this correlation mumbo jumbo and a lot of this statistic stuff. And so a lot of times, we saw with General Motors and Facebook, they pulled $10 million out of their Facebook advertising. And I know that there are other areas, there are other things that are losers, but I would say social is not because it's necessarily ineffective, but it's more difficult to measure its effectiveness.
Bill?
So one that I've seen that you might not expect to come from Google is branded search, which you might be thinking of. We frequently see that's the last thing that someone is searching for, right? And it's kind of navigational in nature, and so customers who consider that to kind of be navigational and add into their conversion funnel and look back at the things prior to that, find that those things will often get more credit. Fortunately, one of those things is generic search, so that works well for Google as well. But definitely branded search tends to fall into that category.
Jeff?
I'd say besides the advertisers that are strictly last click, who are the real big losers out of all this, the biggest losers out of the media equation are kind of the middlemen, the DSPs, some of the trading desk that don't have anything, meaning they're just kind of trading stuff. They don't have content, and so they're going in and buying little pieces, and they're playing the arbitrage game. And so once you start to look at all of this, you see some of the money that they're making. I mean, some of the margins that these companies are making are 90% and higher. It's unbelievable. So once you start to see that and the kind of the dirty little tricks that they're playing, they're really the big losers.
So I'm more of a glasses half full kind of guy. So I'll talk about maybe some of the folks that win. I guess one thing that we've seen that's somewhat counterintuitive is a lot of folks think that attribution means you're going to take a lot of credit from search and give it to display. We tend to find that while you will see absolutely branded versus generic search, which should really be self-evident, right? If something put the brand in someone's head, right, it's some other marketing activity. Between search and display, we find that just because display is definitely driving funnel awareness, but that doesn't mean you can't not be on search. Where are you going to drive all this awareness and they're going to go to Google and you're not going to be there? Now, you might not like Google as much after that because you realize they're just taxing you to get to your customers. But it's pretty critical to still be there. If you're a plumber, 30 years ago, you need to have that Yellow Page ad. You couldn't get business without it. And so it's not like you can have that big share shift. So that's one thing. The other thing I'll say is what we really find is that context and quality of media and quality of environment matters. So really good ad experiences, really high quality content tends to get a lot more credit. And a lot of the things all these guys have talked about as far as the losers, that's because they're stealing credit they don't deserve. And so that's a net positive, I think, for our industry because it means high value inventory is going to get valued appropriately, and that's a good thing.
So any more questions for the panel? I do have one last question for them to answer, but after that there will be no further questions. So,
talking about big losers, I work in healthcare marketing. $2 trillion global industry, right?
Yeah.
And basically it's 5 years behind the time, especially in digital. I have a catch-22 every damn day with every client. They say, hey kid, bring me your innovation. Bring me your blue sky, great idea, push the envelope. And on the flip side, once we bake it and throw it over the fence, they're like, hey, you can't do that. Are you out of your mind? I think it resonates for everybody here, which is always this idea that we're pushing it, we're trying to be innovators within the field, and at the same time our clients are hesitant. They've got issues, whether it's reputation management, whether it's not understanding the technology or ROI. Do you have some, as a panel, do you have best practices that you could share with the group in terms of takeaways that we could bring to our clients to convince them that obviously digital is the way to go, so there are things that we can do to get the results that we're looking for?
Sounds like you need a hug.
Oh, anyone want to answer that?
Yeah, so this is kind of going back to some of the things that were, some of the conservative views earlier. I would, you already know how I kind of feel around starting with more accurate models versus other, non-algorithmic models or last touch, whichever way you're going to attribute success. But I think one of the underlying themes of what they have said that does ring true in these particular cases is if you can't get corporate or executive sponsorship for some of these blue sky ideas, is to start small, prove it. I know in my career, I've had to do that a number of times personally, with things that were considered a little bit blue sky. But if you do start small with maybe a specific area of the company or a specific geography where you begin to do that and you start to prove it, you can't ignore that. And so that would be my only sort of best practice per se for that.
I'm going to join the panel for a second just to answer that question. I'd tell you, because we've talked to a few people in healthcare, is I'm sure that a lot of people who have solutions have done vastly more aggressive things in other verticals. Take things that have worked from another vertical that hasn't caused any issue. I'm sure, if you can't find anyone else, we've got some examples. And take that to your vertical and say, it's already happening. It's already there.
I'd say find a subset of brands. So if you're working in a big healthcare company, they're huge. So find a part of their business that isn't so significant, but still big enough to test results so you can kind of prove your mental. I mean, the one thing about healthcare, at least like pharmaceutical drugs, is brand names tend to stand on their own. There's not any halo effect of one brand tied to another. The fact that Pfizer produces certain drugs across different categories, I don't think resonates with consumers as much as the brand name of the drug. So maybe that gives you some opportunity to still significant enough, but small in the eyes of risk profile for your clients.
Other questions? Okay, I got one more question for the panel, which is, what's the future? So I'm going to start with Google. Bill.
All right, so I'll talk about. So I think attribution is kind of one step along the way to solving the problem that you actually want to solve, which is where do I spend my next dollar, right? And attribution, helps solve that by telling you what dollars spent in the past actually worked well. But there's a whole set of factors that go into where you can actually invest that next dollar to get the right return, right? You may have gotten fantastic return, spending in a particular display channel, right? But you may be sort of tapped out on what that channel is going to return to you, right? The curve is not linear. Beginning, I think attribution will be one piece of moving towards a look at optimization that allows you to think about what touch point across channels is actually going to be the most optimal place for you to be reaching out to customers. So it's not to say that attribution isn't important, but I do think that, particularly when we begin thinking about a more sort of integrated buying system and more systems being real-time and auction-based, we'll be able to provide better optimization solutions.
Paul?
So we do optimization now. So
that's good.
With that,
then you're
so that's
moving
not
to
the
the
future
future
for us. Yeah. So I think to me the most exciting thing that gets me excited is just I've always been in direct response marketing, and online is really an extension of that. And it's always been the bastard stepchild media channel. And I just think we're creating solutions that are going to become utilized as more offline media channels start looking more like online channels. The ability to use this mechanism and these capabilities that we're building so that you can get a really good picture of how users are ingesting media and how that media is helping them to convert across different media channels, online and offline. That to me is the panacea of the future, and that's what's really exciting to me.
Yes, so I'd like to add to this. So I think we alluded to this early on, but there's definitely going to be the future is really bringing the digital and the offline world together. We already see that with the different form factors out there, the ways in which we can engage, our brand can engage with individuals. I think it really is a three-part sort of trend. There's a people part. The face of the analyst is changing. It's no longer just someone who understands marketing, but it's also somebody with more of a truly analytical and mathematical sort of background, which is going to lend itself very well to advancements in technology as well. I think technology is going to improve, bringing it all together and being able to process it. And I think it's all about decision management, right? And so it's not, I know the buzz right now is all around, and even in my title that they told me to actually knock off some of the stuff because it had too many characters in it, is around predictive analytics. Well, it's not even about predictive analytics, right? We've gone from descriptive to diagnostic predictive, but ultimately it's around prescriptive. We're going to get better algorithms that are going to provide us prescriptions on what we need to do next, where we should allocate that next dollar in order to most efficiently and effectively utilize that dollar to really drive return on ad spend across the entire brand.
Okay, we're going to end with a little magic.
So I think the future is almost here. So, some of us up here are already integrating offline into the online. Of course, the problem is that you have a scenario with, I had friends over this weekend watching a football game, so there's no way to know who's in my household and who's actually there. But the reality is that in the future, and this actually can be done right now, every TV ad is actually tagged with an ISKI code, so you know exactly what TV ad it was, what time and date it was sent out. And there are some cable boxes right now that can actually push out a signal within 10 to 11 feet. So if someone has an NFC-enabled device, remember this phone that everyone's carrying around, this little people meter? It can actually pick that up. So if you're over at a friend's house, you can actually get beamed out. And in the background, our servers can pick that up in real time and know that you saw that ad. Then you get in your car and you're driving down the road and the radio is playing an ad, and we can pick that up as well through something like Shazam. That technology is already there. And then as you're driving down the road, you see a huge billboard. And there's an RFID chip in that billboard. And as you drive close enough to it, it syncs with it because it knows that you saw it. Or at least it came within your eyesight. And then you're at home, you're flipping through People magazine, and there's a light-sensitive chip in there, and that picks up and syncs with your phone. So the reality is that all of this technology is here. This is really a big data problem, but it's not a huge problem. And the truth is that sounds like a great concept and everything. And when we first started talking about it a couple years ago, I wanted to file a patent on it because I thought this would be great. But the problem is that somebody already came up with this. There's a ton of prior art on this. It's already been done. And we're pretty close to it now. And that was the Minority Report.
You want to get up and we'll roll this little clip?
A road diverges in the desert. Lexus. The road you're on, John Anderton, is the one less traveled. Make sure you are on time.
Good evening, John. You can move the old-fashioned John Anderton. Provides gourmet cuisine. John Anderton. You can use a Guinness right about now.
Stressed out, John Anderton. Escape from it all, Harrison. Get away, John Anderton. Forget your troubles. Talk slow, John Anderton.
We have dessert and drinks out there and magnetic IOs on the way out.